All right, so today we get to talk about survey research. So you get the pleasure of listening to my great voice throughout. And I have uploaded on Moodle a document that outlines different questions that you'll ask. So I would encourage you to pull that out. You can take notes, jot down things as you go along, start adding to it. That will help throughout. And it will kind of guide the different things that we're looking for you and things that you need to pay attention to. Not that it's not all important, but things to note as we're going through the presentation. So I hope you enjoy listening to my wonderful voice. Descriptive research is different than experimental research. So you're not manipulating the data, you're not comparing it against a control group, you're just getting information from the environment. And so just like this picture here, you're not moving the mountains, you're looking at what's already there and getting as much information regarding whatever phenomenon it is that you're trying to get. Just enjoy the beauty of this picture. So just as we were talking about survey research being descriptive, there are a number of benefits to why we do survey research. One of those is to gain an understanding of an existing phenomena. So what's already out there, just like we were talking about that picture, getting a picture of those mountains, what's already out there, helping us understand that. This is especially helpful for things we know very little about, getting to know more about it before we can do further experimental or more intensive types of research. And here's an example, clearly true. Maybe you can test this within yourself of whether this fits for you in your experience. Another example is to identify problems and concerns. I think that this is a really helpful form of survey research in terms of finding out the needs assessment of a population, of a clinical group, or a certain population which you are trying to serve, knowing what are their needs, what are their concerns, and then how can we address those. So, for example, knowing what concerns parents may have in a community can help address and help focus the services which are offered. And then providing support for circumstances or practices. This could help advocate for services provided at an agency. A lot of agencies provide satisfaction surveys throughout services, at the end of services. And while it may not be published, it's helping to advocate for what's already occurring, what they're doing, and supporting their services. And then it can also provide comparison or evaluation. So 95 or 99% of ISU counseling graduates pass the NCE exam with a national average pass rate of 75%. Hopefully, you all will get 100%, which would be great. And then to help determine how others are dealing with the same or similar problem. So, for example, this could be surveying what professionals within the field are doing, looking at people of a certain degree level, what they might be doing, looking at marriage and family counselors and what types of interventions they're using with a certain population. It can help guide further research as well as inform practice. Again, all of these examples I've given are clearly hypothetical and not based on research. There are a number of types of survey designs. So the first one we'll talk about is longitudinal survey design. So these are ones that are across time. And so there's multiple administrations of the surveys in different ways and within different means. So one example is trend studies. So this would be wanting to know opinions or perceptions or practices of a certain target population over time. So that target population is the same, but the people administered and given that to might be different. The example the book gives is really clear. So wanting to know the attitudes of 7th graders over 5 years. So how do the thoughts of 7th graders change? So not the same 7th graders as they grow, but each year new 7th graders come in, and what are their attitudes and beliefs? Cohort studies. So the example your book gave was also really clear. So looking at a group of adolescents after they got out of treatment, and maybe you're looking first at 12 to 14-year-olds after treatment, and then next you might look at 14 to 16-year-olds. But you're surveying or sampling different people, so you might get different responses, and it's not the same cohort you're receiving. You're just looking at over time what that could be. And then panel studies is the most intensive, so this is often what we think of with longitudinal survey designs. So this is looking at the same people over time, following those same people. And that's obviously the most intensive, takes the most time commitment, has the most benefits, because you're following the same people and you can track it down to the specific participants of that research design. But it does take a lot of work, and there might be a lot of dropout. And then cross-sectional survey design. So these are one-time administration and the most common that's used for ease of use and simplicity. So those are the basic types of survey designs. Approaches to data collection. So there are a lot of different ways that you can collect information. So once you've figured out who is my population and what type of survey design do I want to do I want to do longitudinal, or do I want to just do a one-time administration, then you have to decide, how am I going to collect data? So you could do interviews. So this lovely little picture here shows that. You could meet in person with the people. So you could do a focus group. So that's where you gather a whole group of people and you're interviewing them all at the same time. There are obviously limitations and benefits to that. We'll talk about those in a minute. One-on-one, and then also through the telephone. And then there's questionnaires. And so these are self-administered questionnaires, mailed surveys, and electronic surveys. SurveyMonkey, there are a lot of new and available resources for online surveys. And SurveyMonkey is an example of that. Qualtrics, there's a number of different electronic survey formats. So I want you guys to think about your experiences of taking surveys. What kind of data collection methods were used? What was it like? Could you tell what kinds of questions they were asking? And how did you experience that? And what is your preference? From your own experience, how does that lend to how you might do survey research? And I want you to continue to think about your own experiences of participating or being a participant of survey research and how that impacts your view of this type of research method. So here's an example of an online survey request, and you guys are more than welcome to do this. So this is one that I actually got today. So on SESNet, we get, so that's the Counselor Education and Supervision listserv that send out to counselor educators. There are a lot of surveys that are sent out. It could be dissertations, a lot of research. Sometimes it's complained about because there is so much. We're inundated. It didn't take me long to find an example of a survey. So this is one that is sent out to counselor educators and supervisors, but this woman, Maria Lauer, is asking us to send it to students. And so you guys all have the opportunity to take this if you'd like. It says it will take approximately 15 minutes. If you click the link below, you're welcome to take it and see what that's like for you. And here's another example of one that you could take. If you don't want to do the first one, you could do this one. It says it will take 20 to 30 minutes or so. Has information. As you can see, there's a little bit of variation in terms of what information they give out in the initial send out. When you click the link, there is a lot more information in terms of consent and IRB approval and different things that they had to include. But the original request can vary in terms of length. So feel free to try them out. You can be a part of the counseling field's research. Benefits and limitations. So first we're going to talk about interviews, what the benefits are. So benefits, you can build a connection between the participant and the researcher. So that one-on-one contact. As you guys know from counseling, there's something to be said about meeting one-on-one in person with somebody and the connection that you can create and how meaningful that can be. Even in an interview for surveys, So this can add depth to the data. They can see, responses, and participants can clarify or make sure that their voice is heard by having somebody across them that they can talk to. Participants can deviate, or if they're unsure about what a question is asking, they can ask for clarification, and that ensures that the participants understand what is being asked throughout the survey. Telephone surveys, it can access larger locations, so you're not limited by having to meet in person, so you can access people who might live farther distances away. But there is increased cost, so you have to have somebody for every single interview available. That might include paying somebody to do those interviews, or it might take your own time and investment to do that. There's no anonymity, so if you're talking about a sensitive subject, participants are less likely to disclose or talk about those in a in-person interview. And then in group format, there's group dynamics that are obvious that could occur. Consensus can be difficult to obtain, and there are those limitations. And then through the telephone interviews, there's lack of nonverbal cues, so you won't get as much depth and richness in a telephone as versus face-to-face. And then there's obviously place for researcher bias or influence. So the way the researcher asks the questions can influence what's answered or how it's answered, or the nonverbal cues from the researcher can definitely play a role in what the participant chooses to share or how they respond, which also lends its way to social desirability. So if you're face-to-face with somebody, it increases the likelihood to want to give socially desirable answers because you're not anonymous and they know who you are in a way, and you want to give either the answer they want to hear or the answer you think might be appropriate. For questionnaires, there are benefits. So it's less expensive. You don't have to pay somebody or be available to do every single interview. It might allow you to access a lot more people. So there's ease and speed in administering. So you could send it out to a whole bunch of people and you don't even have to think about it for a while. It's kind of taking care of itself for a while. You can send to entire population, possibly. So if you want to interview an entire school or survey an entire school, you could send the survey to every single person within that population. And then web-based is certainly less costly than mailing, which is why we're seeing an increasing constantly number of web-based surveys. I don't know if you all have been privy to that or seen that yourself, but I definitely have seen that increase of web-based surveys, which can be a great benefit and allows research to perhaps take place that couldn't have previously. And then there is anonymity. People don't have to disclose who they are potentially and can protect their identity. And data, if you're doing it web-based, can be directly transferred from a lot of the different survey formats online to your statistical analysis programs, which can help in the analysis. You will have to change the formatting of the constructs in order to fit analysis process, but it does ease that process. You don't have to manually enter every single survey response into SPSS. But then there are limitations. So one limitation is that, particularly for the web-based, research does show that minorities in certain age groups access or have less access to internet than other certain groups. And so Caucasians and younger populations tend to have more access or more frequent use of the internet. This is changing constantly. So I uploaded an article by Brunello and Wheaton as a reference, so you can check that out. So that one's talking about the benefits and limitations of web-based survey research in counseling, in the field of counseling. Great resource, really helpful in understanding why one might choose or not choose to use that type of format. response rate. So particularly with questionnaires, the response rate is really low. And so you have to send out your request multiple times. And if you're mailing those out, that can get pretty costly. And then if participants are unsure or unclear about a question, there's no way of knowing, and so you might get erroneous responses. Technological difficulties, sometimes people might click the wrong thing, or technology always, there's always difficulties that could come up. And then that relationship that is a huge benefit of face-to-face interviews is not present, obviously, when you're not meeting one-on-one. So as you look at these benefits and limitations, note to yourself which one you think you might prefer. Would you prefer to do interview face-to-face or phone, or would you want to do a questionnaire? Would you want to mail them out? Would you want to do them web-based? And it's important that you make a decision not because it's easy, but because it would be most beneficial and most effective for your population, for whatever question it is that you're surveying. A lot of things to consider and why you might choose a certain collection method. Steps for conducting survey research. All right, so first decide what you want to learn. So what are you curious about? What do you want to find out about? What is important for you to know? What do you need to know? What is the population? So after you identify what you want to learn, who is part of that question? And then identify what methodology and data collections you want to use. And so just like I talked about previously, there needs to be a rationale and clear reason to why you want to use that method beyond it's easy. And then develop a questionnaire, or you can use an existing assessment. So even in surveys, a lot of assessment measures are used, or surveys are already created that can be used or combined in a really unique way, or added to add additional questionnaire items in addition to existing assessment measures or survey measures, can really enrich whatever question you're wanting to find out. Then you have to pilot test a questionnaire. We're going to talk a little bit later more about creating questions. So once you've come up with your questionnaire, test it out. See what the responses are. Do participants have questions about it? Do people have responses to help you clarify and clean up the questionnaire? Administer it to your actual sample population. Analyze it and write your report. It's important with whatever research you do that information gets out to whoever it is that needs that knowledge or will be best helped by that knowledge that you've gained. All right, so let's take a break, and I want you guys to go through the first 4 steps. So this is part of what you're going to be turning in. So use the first 4 steps to identify a question you'd like to answer through survey research. So decide what you want. So write down, what are you curious about? What question do you want answered? And who is that population? And how would you want to get that information? And then come up with around 3 questions, or if you already have an existing assessment, great. And write a little description about that. So take some time, go through that, and see what you can come up with. And I'm excited to see what you have. If you need more help in identifying ways to set up a survey research design, I've put this little link to YouTube to help you if you need more help or want more ideas. It's just a quick little video of other steps to consider. Okay, so now coming up with your questions. So hopefully by now you've tried to come up with some questions, and now we're going to talk a little bit more of what you can focus on and things to consider when you're doing that. So there's different types of questions. Open-ended, close-ended. So open-ended, those can be particularly helpful if you don't know very much about what it is you're surveying. So for example, if you don't know very much about the eating habits of 75-year-old men in certain population group, I don't know, then you might just leave that open-ended and let them fill in the blank. Close-ended, important things to consider is making sure that you have all possible answers available there and that it's consistent. So this would be like multiple choice or pick the best or different kinds of things where they have specific items they need to choose from. And then what type of data? So remember this for the NCE, NOIR, nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio data. So this is something to consider, and you might go over with a statistician of what type of data you want to have, and this will impact the type of questions you ask. Because what data you have can affect your statistical analysis. I recently ran into this in a quantitative project I was doing, and it was a survey. And, we thought we had these awesome questions, and, some of them were pretty awesome. And then we went to do the analysis, and it's like, oh, dang it, this really cool question that we asked, we can't run in this other analysis over here because it's not in the type of data that can be used in this analysis. So it's really important to think about that. And there's some ways that you can fudge around things, but it's something that you definitely have to consider and think about. How many factors do you want? Is there an existing assessment? Are you going to create one? So if there's an existing assessment, you have to get permission to use it. If you want to modify it, you also have to get permission to use that. And so there's a lot of different things. For the survey research that I recently did with my cohort on spiritual competence of doctoral supervisors, we had to get permission to transfer a paper assessment onto an online format. And the person who created the spiritual competencies assessment that we used was really excited that we were going to make it available online and wanted us to share with them how we did that. And so it was a benefit on both ends. Length, how long? So think about your own experience with survey, being a participant of a survey. If they say, 5 to 10 minutes versus 45 minutes to an hour, it might change who and how many responses you get. And then the language used. You have to eliminate bias. Think about cultural language that's used. Are you going to offer it in different languages? A lot of things to consider. Some things you may not even notice in the way you use language. And that's where it's helpful to have other people try it out. And you can have statisticians or people who specialize in that also check it out because they can catch things that we might not be able to. And then making sure there's not overlap of constructs. So again, the survey that I recently did, we found out after doing our analysis that there were 2 questions that were really asking the same thing. So we could have eliminated one of those questions or reworded the 2 in a combination so that we weren't asking the same thing in 2 questions. And then decide, are you going to provide an incentive for completing the survey? I remember from my teenage days going to the mall and getting asked to complete a survey on Mountain Dew. So I completed it, and I think I got $25, which was pretty sweet. So I was very happy about my 30 minutes that I spent doing that survey because I got some shopping money. That can also impact who responds and what your response rate is. Speaking of response rates, here are the numbers. So a low response rate is 25%, high 75%. Typically in the literature, you'll see an average of 50% or higher is what you'll typically want. Sometimes, it's important to note, sometimes you may not know your exact response rate. So for example, all these surveys that are sent out on the Counselor Education and Supervision listserv, unless you know the exact number of people on that listserv and the number of people who send those surveys to other people not on that listserv, it's hard to calculate what your response rate is because it's hard to know who actually received that survey and had access to it versus deciding to collect the emails of all students in counselor education programs and send them individually to each student, which you have a clear-cut number of who you sent that to and how many people responded. And so there are limitations to people just sending out surveys through a listserv. And it makes it really difficult to have a response rate, and I don't know how they do that. For the research that I recently did, we did a combination. So we sent it out through the listserv, but then we also painstakingly bought the ACA student membership records and went through each email address and found email addresses for all of the doctoral students listed and then sent emails out individually to every single doctoral student, which we could get an email address for. And so that was a lot of work and a lot of time, but then we were able to calculate a response rate, at least for those people that we sent out specifically, individually, the emails. Okay. And finally, once you have all of your data, there are a number of ways to analyze the data. Commonly used, we have descriptive statistics. So, if you remember, this is called a descriptive research. So naturally, there are descriptive statistics. Do you remember what they are? We've got the mean, median, mode, standard deviation. So those are some examples of different descriptive statistics that we have. And so saying what percentage of so-and-so, what percentage of so-and-so, just giving a big picture of these basic descriptive statistics. So really simple types of things. Oh, percentages. And then we also have correlation design. So just like we talked about, survey research is not experimental. And so you're looking at a relationship between things. So the relationship between NCE pass rate and GPA. Or the relationship between two different things. It could be a number of different things. And so you're looking at the relationship. So correlational designs and things like that are typically and commonly found in survey research. Now, there are a lot of other analysis methods that are used beyond just these commonly used ones. And some of them are pretty intense. So multiple regression is one that is used within survey research, which is interesting because multiple regression is striving to find prediction. And so it's trying to find what variable is predicting change. And so if you think about that, there's a little bit of, I guess, differences of opinions among the statistic world in terms of the use of multiple regression with survey research and whether you can actually predict and use a prediction type of analysis with data that is or often may seem correlational in nature. Chapter 6 in your book that you have talks about these predictive designs, and also factor analysis is included in that. So factor analysis, trying to look at different constructs and pieces that might go together and fit together in describing a certain construct. Really similar to cluster analysis. So, now that we've talked about many different pieces of survey research, we have benefits and limitations to survey research. So before I talk about some of these, I want you to take a minute and jot down what you see as the benefits. Why would someone choose to do survey research? Why would you choose to do survey research? Why would you choose to read survey research? Why would you choose to access it? When would it be helpful for you? Think about that. And then why would you choose not to? Or why would you maybe not choose to read as much survey research? Lots of things to consider. So benefits. It can be inexpensive for the researcher. It can be really easy. It's less invasive for the participants. The treatment isn't manipulated. This can also be important for things that you may not be able to manipulate or control. And so it's less invasive, potentially less harm, less risk to the participants. This also impacts the IRB approval. A lot less intensive process to get approval from the research board for survey research designs. It can help raise awareness. And so if people aren't aware of a current phenomena, you can really put it out there and help people understand the frequency or the percentage or really what's going on out there. It can promote practice as well as really enhance further research and guide further research. And you can gain information, particularly on things that weren't previously known. And thinking back to those descriptive statistics, oftentimes it can be really understandable to consumers. So standard deviations, means, percentages, and correlational data, those are things that can be really, easy to digest for the everyday consumer. For example, just the other day, I was driving home listening to NPR, and I heard some statistics they're throwing out about people who are short in stature and their increased risk for coronary heart disease. As you can imagine, I was not thrilled to hear this news, but it was something I could easily digest and understand just through listening through the radio of the research that they did, just through surveying different genetics and different frequencies of height and coronary heart disease. So yeah, that's an example of hopefully my okay heart. Limitations. So it's not causal. So it's correlational. Some people, like I said, might use multiple regression or ANOVAs or different type of analyses. But it's important to remember survey research is not causal. Things were not manipulated. Things were not changed. You can't pinpoint the change or any change. There's just a relationship that's being described. And you're relying on self-report data. So it's within the perceptions and the eyes of the participant. And you don't know exactly if the things they're saying are biased or not, or if it's true. So you can never 100% say this phenomenon that I'm describing is true, because it's based on self-report. It's based on a number of different things versus real-world observation or manipulation. And so there's also that researcher bias. We talked a little bit about that with the interviewer and one-on-one type of interviews of surveys. The researcher can impact the results of the survey as well as the participant bias. So if the researcher knows, okay, if they're not blind to what the intent or purpose of the survey is, they can ask questions in a certain way, as well as one researcher might ask the survey in this way, and another researcher might ask the question this way if you have different interviewers. As I said before, opinions, perceptions, and while I did talk about it being inexpensive and easy to use and less invasive, it still is described as labor intensive. It's a lot of work. And creating a survey, creating questionnaires, creating all the different pieces of a survey design can be a lot of work and is a lot of work. I found out the long way through the recent research that I did of, this is still a lot of work and takes a lot more thought than just jotting down questions I'm curious about. So I hope you guys consider all these things as you go forward and thinking about your approach to survey research. And again, jot down, I want you to reflect again on your own experiences of being a participant or doing survey research. Hopefully maybe you'll take a minute and do those online requests that I have from CESNET to students, counseling students. Again, the ones that I posted specifically said, please give these to your students. And so you are welcome to participate in those. I have posted on Moodle some questions and prompts for you to consider, so go through those. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you all later.